and I'm going to click. So I clicked record on my computer, and hopefully this, hopefully this works. So good afternoon and welcome to our grant writing workshop. I apologize for all the technical difficulties, and I really hope that you're able to watch this recording if you're watching this recording, because I don't even know if it's going to be accessible afterwards. But thank you so much for being here today. I want to start by acknowledging all of you for all the work that you're already doing in the community. I see GIAC is in the house. Whether you're a grassroots, a small organization, a newer organization, or one of the more established, larger organizations with a whole chief development officer and an entire department for writing grants and all that. We just want to thank you for showing up and meeting the needs of the community. We at the Community Foundation, we don't see ourselves as just a funder. We talk about that all the time. We want to consider ourselves a community partner, and this means investing in not only the outcomes of your work, so investing in you, granting to you, but also in the ability for you to sustain your work and grow and build capacity. So that's why we do things like this, and we have other resources that are available to you during the grant process. We know that access to funding is not always equitable. Like I said, there are different levels of what you can bring. Some organizations have a grant writer, some have an entire department, and some organizations are just simply volunteer run. So we believe that it's part of our responsibility to make sure that it's equitable, and we want to help close that gap. So that is why we do sessions like this. And today is one of the workshops where we're trying to do this. It's about building capacity, demystifying this mysterious thing that we call grant writing, and creating this space for co-discovery, co-learning, asking questions, and in a safe space as well, with zero judgment. And there's no such thing as a dumb question. We want you to feel more confident, more prepared in your grant writing, and we were very specific in making sure that this grant writing workshop is not geared towards the Community Foundation. So you can use this information for any of your grants that you're going to be writing. We have a separate information session next week for the Community Foundation's grant cycle that is coming up. I will put the link in the chat for that. Make sure that there's nobody in the waiting room here. Sorry about that. So I will put that link in the chat. So that's for next week. It's very specific to the Community Foundation grant cycle, where I will talk about expectations for like the questions. I will do a live demo. I will talk about our scoring rubric. I will talk about how we review the applications, eligibility, so all of those things. So that is next week. I'll put the link in the chat. So I'm really excited to introduce to you Stacey Murphy. She is a great friend of the Community Foundation, and what I appreciate most about her is her commitment to helping organizations, whether it's small or large, translate their vision into something that funders can clearly understand and invest in. So she makes grant writing easy. And I'm going to read her. She's got a short bio here. I'm going to read. Stacey Murphy is the owner of Mercy Grant Consulting since 2012 and helps her nonprofit business and academic clients obtain funding to do important works in service to the world. She enjoys making processes easier and aiding others to demystifying grant proposals. Prior to that, she operated programs in the housing, energy efficient, and sustainability realms for 18 plus years in Tompkins County and Center County, Pennsylvania. We invited her here not just because she's amazing and an expert and wonderful in what she does, but to also engage with you. And so I encourage everyone to lean in and ask questions. Like I said, there is no such thing as a dumb question or a silly question. Think about how the information that she shares, think about how it applies directly to your organization. This is very, very valuable. She's with us for the next hour. So I encourage you to, ask lots and lots of questions, and feel free to, engage, put things in the chat. I'll be monitoring chat. If there's something that you want to ask and you feel it's silly, then direct message me and then I will ask the question for you. Just want to make sure that, you're engaged. And I might, throughout the presentation, I might like put one or two questions in the chat to kind of, make sure everyone is still engaged. So with that, I am going to pass it on to you, Stacey. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, Gloria. That was a really, really lovely introduction. And thank you to those of you who put some information in the chat about yourselves or your organizations already. It's always fun to hear and meet new organizations and new people. Some of you, of course, I've heard of, but others I have not. And that's always exciting to me, especially here in our area. There's always so much neat stuff going on. Gloria, thanks for the introduction. As she mentioned, I've, been in the area in business since 2012 and in the area for a lot longer than that. Some of just I did not updated this graphic yet for 2025, I realized, but it's just to give you an idea of the grant work that I do. I work on all sorts of proposals, things that are federal, state level, local, private, corporate. I've written things that have ranged from like $500 requests up to $100 million. There's only one $100 million one. That was kind of an outlier. But overall, pretty much consistently between all those different audiences and levels, I'm about 2 for 3 in terms of the grants that I get with the people I partner with. So yes, please do share some questions, whatever you have in the chat. It's a much better way to learn. I plan on going through these fairly quickly, these slides, because I want to leave as much time as possible at the end to answer your questions. So let's get started. So basically this is just an overview of what we'll cover today. A lot of success in getting a grant application or a series of grant applications ready involves becoming grant ready and planning ahead. We'll talk a little bit about what kinds of things make for a good narrative, how to make sure that you're addressing different details, and just acknowledging the relationship with funders, and the role that building a relationship with funders can play in your grant process. So first, a lot of organizations I work with, this is where I start with a lot of new organizations that I get started with, this sort of concept of becoming grant ready, which means you have a lot of pieces and parts pulled together so you're able to respond to an opportunity when it comes up. A lot of times opportunities are well known and ahead, so you can plan and be ready for them, but sometimes things emerge out of sequence from when they might normally, or just all of a sudden, and they might have a very quick turnaround time. That's certainly been the case with some federal opportunities in the last year. So it's good to be able to clearly describe what you do want to do and be ready for what you need your funding for. And there's a series of things that are good to consider when you're doing that. Things like, a lot of times people have a file ready, like either a physical file, but more likely like a file on your computer. They include things like board lists, financials like your last audit or maybe your 990. These are all things that tend to be things that most that probably will come up, especially in a foundation level proposal, but very often in other level proposals too. Um, you want to have a good, concise description of your organization's, like your mission, your vision, your values, goals for either your organization or your program, just the history, and just like a very short list of your programs and services. For that, a lot of that stuff is stuff that if you have a website, it's probably on your website. So that information comes in handy for that. If you have an organization chart, that's a good thing to have in that file because a lot of places ask for that. Maybe your most recent publications, like your annual report, articles, you've had news clippings about your topic of area that you serve, that kind of thing. And data on folks you've served in the last year, how many people, demographics, that kind of thing. Or information on trends that are in your field, like increasing issues that are coming up that your clients face, that kind of thing. So all of that stuff is good to just sort of have so you can have it to draw on when you need it. And that's because in a lot of proposals, this is the kind of questions you'll see over and over again. And a lot of what you do in order, in the interest of efficiency and saving time, if you're planning on applying to multiple funding sources, and a lot of organizations do, is if you have a lot of the information that can be transferred and used from application to application, you don't spend a lot of time sort of reinventing the wheel. So these kinds of things are elements of a lot of different grant proposals. They're not all worded just like this, but a lot of times these are the topics that come up. And some of these are not just your documents that you can have in a file, but they're things that you can work on ahead or think about ahead. Like if you're applying for something that has to do with a program that you operate or that you want to expand or new thing you want to start, you'll want to think about what are your goals for it and how are you going to know that you're successful with your goals and what measurements are you going to use. Your program description, certainly. Timelines can be very important, especially if what you're asking for is money to construct something or equipment, like those are capital expenses. Timelines become real important with, say, state level grant applications that want to see how long it's going to take you to implement something, or especially if you're buying stuff or building something, they want to see very often that you're spending, that the things you're procuring are within the limits of their guidelines. Like some organizations will let you expense for, will let you bill for things that are already in progress. Others say don't spend, you can't bill for anything that happens before we sign a contract. So you have to know that and kind of plan around that. Certainly evidence of need. They want to know if they're giving you money, why, what need are you going to be filling? Why you want to do this program right now? Is there an emerging trend that is different from what you've been seeing in the past? Why you need the funds right now? Certainly, all grant requests will ask for a budget of some sort. Most will ask for your organization level budget to actual for a year, and then one for a program if you're applying for program funding. A lot of them want to know if the funding you're asking for is meeting the whole need. A lot of times it isn't, and they want to know, so what's your plan for getting the rest of your funding that you need for this particular need? So they want to know what other planned requests you have, what other sources of support you have. Some organizations will ask things like, what will happen with it if we can't give you this funding? What does it mean to your community? If we can only give you some of the money, how are you going to get the rest of it? Those kinds of questions. So these are all good things to think about and maybe have some idea of how you're going to answer them beforehand, because it will save you time when the actual time comes up. And we can talk about, when it gets to the question and answer time, we can talk about some specific strategies for answering these if you have those questions. Certainly they want to know information, credentials of those involved, like you, your staff, your programs. If you have a history of doing some sort of service and you've had a lot of success with it, you can talk about the success you've had. if it's something new you're starting that you haven't done before, if you're going to be hiring somebody with a certain amount of experience, and then you can talk about what you're going to be looking for so you'll be able to show you can do that. Those are all things to keep in mind. And also partners if you are doing a collaborative application. So project narratives come down to they're sort of the centerpiece of any request for funding, any proposal you do. They are called different things. Sometimes they're called project narratives. Sometimes the project narrative shows up in a series of questions. If you're applying on a grant portal, and like kind of all together, they make up a narrative instead of it being just one big document. But um, this is sort of a method I have to like try to help make people's applications resonate with anybody who's reviewing it. I mean, certainly all applications should tell a story. They should have elements like, they told us if you were writing something in school, if you're going to be like, they said, think of it, they would say, think about it like a reporter. You need to address the who, what, when, where, and whys of things. And that's certainly true, but thinking of things from these other perspectives also can help. So these are the three artistic proofs. They were developed, they came about by the Greek philosopher Aristotle came up with these. And basically these are ways to sort of consider how to influence an audience. And really, when you're writing proposals, it's an influential document. You're trying to influence somebody to believe in what you do enough to support what you do. So it kind of makes sense when it comes to grant writing too. And each of these three things put a different value and weight on different ways to answer questions. And it's meant to do that because all reviewers, generally speaking, are human beings, and they all have different values and look at things differently. So what I mean by these, so ethos is kind of the first one. Basically, that refers to your ethical appeal. This one, most nonprofits are very good at talking about, because you're very good at talking about how you're credible in your community and, the good things you do, what your expertise is, and what your service and what your value is in your community. And that's why it's easy to use a lot of times in organization and grant applications where that the review team is probably going to be local people who may have heard about you already, maybe they haven't, but that's sort of who you convince they know something about your community already. Basically, to use ethos, you establish your expertise on a topic. You can talk about your track record, any awards you've gotten, what makes you the authority on the services you provide, that kind of thing. And for reviewers, it resonates because it shows them that you'll be responsible with funds that they give you, and that, there's a pathway there that they can sort of visualize how what you're requesting will work and will do good in the community. Subconscious things to remember that impact this have to do with maybe things like grammar and spelling in your grant application. They seem little and they seem like they shouldn't matter a whole lot. I know a lot of people that, think, that silly grammar shouldn't matter. And, in the greater scheme of things, in the greater good of work you are doing in your community, maybe it doesn't. But it's a sort of a subtle subconscious thing a lot of times for reviewers. Like if they see spelling mistakes and things, they might think, well, why didn't they bother to proofread this before they sent it in? If they're not careful with this, how do we know they're going to be careful with the money we give them? That kind of thing, which may not seem fair, but subconscious things very often are not. So the next thing we'll talk about is pathos, and that refers to emotional appeal. You connect the audience, your audience members' hearts to what it is you're trying to accomplish in your review teams, to get them to understand why you are asking them, what you're doing brings about a greater good in the world. Basically, it's to pull on heartstrings. This is where in a narrative you might weave in personal stories or, comments that people have given you saying, thank you, your assistants helped me do XYZ, if you have quotes like that. shows improved situations or lives or conditions, improved conditions in communities. Some grant applications will actually ask for stories. Tell us a personal story that illustrates how you have done good in the community. Others don't. Others don't ask for that at all. But sometimes it can help things stand out a little bit, especially in like state applications or federal applications. They tend to not rely on this a lot, but sometimes it's good to think about if a reviewer is reviewing many, many, many grant applications, if you put in something that's a little bit personal, just a touch of it, maybe it'll catch their imagination and it'll help your stand out a little bit. Overall, it's not something to put a lot of in a state or federal application, I'd say, but it might help a little bit. Sometimes if you're submitting something that will allow you to put in pictures and graphics, that can be a good subconscious thing that can help with establishing an emotional appeal to and pathos. Obviously, I mean, sad puppy dog is one thing, but even if that's not you, you may have, pictures or images that show some kind of impact of what you do. Even environmental change things can be good for that, all sorts of things. Okay, and so almost sort of the opposite of pathos is logos. And this is, you have strong facts and strong data to show that what you do makes a difference. It shows that things are necessary, what the needs are in your community. It can show, you can use them to show trends in needs. If the need for your services has grown exponentially in X number of years, you can use that to show that. And you can use it to demonstrate your results. Over the past year, over the past 2 years, we have helped this many people. We've had success with doing X percentage of things, whatever your data would be that applies to your specific project or program. And this is a good thing for funders that have geographic interests that are wondering like, well, okay, I know hunger is a problem, but what is the need of hunger in my community? I know that I've heard, so you can demonstrate how what you do is relevant, even when they might know globally something is important. It also is good for people who are numbers people. So people who scrutinize budgets tend to be logos people. Like they want to see the numbers. They want to see that what you're asking for is enough to do your project, or that you've considered, that all the funding sources add up and that kind of thing. There are people who sometimes in reviewing grant applications, they just go straight to the budget and they look to make sure everything adds up right. They don't even care about the rest of the words. That's where they want to start because they're that much into data. And it also helps you show, so things like state grants, sometimes it is part of the data and metrics is part of how you're even going to score. Like at the state level, housing grants, for example, will give a certain number of points to your geographic, dependent what level of poverty might say is in your geographic level. And either you get all those points or you get none of those points, or you get a sliding scale. And that's really nothing you can do anything about, but it's just one way that data can play out. So those are 3 things to consider in addition to, like I said, telling your story of the who, what, when, and where. These are sort of the three perspectives that can play into how you describe what you do. I just want to ask, if people want to answer, you can in the chat maybe. Or just think about it if you don't feel like answering in the chat. What do you think which of these do you think is most important? Out of these 3, if you're writing a grant application, which of these seems most important to you out of all 3 of them? I see one vote for logos. Anyone else wanna? Yep. Someone else says logos. Yeah, many of you are numbers people. A lot of numbers and data people, looks like. It really, the way a lot of people answer this has to do with what your sort of personal preference might be. There's some people who just, they want to know the story. They want to know how, they can, what they're giving money to feels good. Other people do feel very much like that. Um, I'd say the best thing to do is, depending on what kind of grant you're writing and who your audience is, and if you have contact with a program manager or an opportunity um, to review things beforehand or ask Q&A things, it's a good idea to try to assess what seems to be most appropriate and most interesting to your audience and to your funder. And you can do that a lot by just reviewing the grant criteria. Like if an RFP, state and federal ones do this a lot, we'll have the scoring criteria. You'll get this many points for this and this many points for this. And that will tell you, okay, this is how they're going to fund things and this is what we need to respond to. And in those cases, yes, a lot of it has to do with logos, and then also ethos a lot, because they'll very often want to know your track record and your success and things like that. On the local end, though, you might see when you read through questions that they want to know how many people you served, and he sees sort of like a case study story kind of thing, and that's more pathos. So it just pays to try to know your audience ahead of time. It's kind of the main part of that. All right. So this is, I'll try to give some examples of what to do instead. And I'm sorry, you're going to see this chicken fella a little bit. I went down a rabbit hole with clip art and decided I really liked him. So, all right. So one thing to do is you don't want to apply to the wrong funder or assume they know about your organization already. One time I was working with a daycare organization. We read through an RFP for like a regional economic development thing. They were looking for construction funding. It looked like within their criteria and even their history of recent grants they had funded that they would be a viable candidate and it would be a good fit. We did a letter of interest, and by the time that got reviewed and we talked to a program officer, we realized that that organization had changed they'd shifted and they didn't want to fund the construction funding for daycare centers anymore, and our project wasn't viable. We never would have known that. So that's an example of like picking the wrong funder for something. Sometimes on the surface, something will look like a match. Like I know people who will do grant research projects and they'll see something that looks like a fit for their organization, like an education project, but then you dig down more and really they just want to fund research. They don't want to fund project. So that's another example. You got to look real close before you spend a lot of time and effort writing something. Also, too, you don't want to assume that they know about your organization already. Tompkins County is a pretty rich community. It's also a community where a lot of people know a lot of people. So it's easy to think that the reviewers, say at the Community Foundation or United Way or somewhere will know about your project already or your programs already. But the review team members change and they may be somebody who has never heard of your organization. So you really got to be careful about that. You don't want to skip any questions or answer them out of order. One time I was writing a housing application and they wanted to see an administrative plan that went number by number. And this was a long time ago. I was really young. And the way they asked the questions, I thought, oh, it'll flow much better if I write it this other way. And I wrote it the other way and we didn't get the grant. And when I was talking to my program manager at the state, I told him that was my rationale. And he just looked at me and said, well, do you want to write the great American novel or do you want to get funded? And I said, okay, ouch. But he had a point. So now I make sure I answer everything in the order it's asked. And the reason for that is reviewers have to read lots and lots and lots of applications. And they may not mean to, but if you make them go looking for information instead of it being right where they expect to see it, they're going to get crabby and it might affect their ability or their interest in funding you. It's just kind of a human nature thing. Okay. Again, you don't want to ignore details in the questions or the application. If a question has 5 different sub-questions, try to say something about all 5 of the different sub-questions. Be careful with typos and grammatical errors again. If you can have somebody else read your application as a beta reader, do that. Make sure it makes sense to them. It's always good to give it to someone who maybe doesn't know everything there is to know about your organization or your program already, that can be hard to do. But if there is somebody who's just a step or two removed or not in the weeds as much, they'll be able to read something and tell you if it makes sense to an outsider. And also they'll maybe pick up on some typos or grammatical errors that spell check wouldn't have caught for you. You don't want to miss the deadline. It's heartbreaking. I've had organizations miss deadlines because we just had the deadline wrong, or we thought it was 5 p.m. on a certain day, but it was noon, and they got things in late. And or a portal, if it's an online portal you apply to, if you miss a deadline, it will slam shut on you. It's always a better practice to try to plan to submit things ahead of time. Sometimes, especially state level or even grants.gov at the federal level, will crash on a day that applications are due because so many people are trying to apply at once. So it's a good idea to try to get your work in early so that doesn't happen to you. You don't want to be non-compelling. Again, try to tell as good a story as you can. You also want to have done as well as you possibly could on a previous grant. By that, I mean, if you have a grant with an organization, this is how to sort of build in the best practice. If you find that you are working on a project that has grant funding in it and you had promised a funder that you were going to spend money on certain things, but you find out you can't really do that for whatever reason, either the procurement deadlines are too long or some important facet of your program has changed, like you found out from the people in your community that what you proposed really isn't going to work for them. So you want to pivot and make it in a way that will be more responsive. Reach out and talk to your program officers. Don't wait till the end to just sort of tell them, well, we weren't able to do that. Program officers would much rather a lot of them, they want to be part of the solution if they can. So letting them know ahead of time, basically honors that partnership a little bit, and it, will help keep you out of water. To the best of your ability, get your grant reports in on time. When you get a grant, pay attention to when the report is due, and make sure you get it in on time. Some grants don't have reports, but a lot of them do. Some of them have very strict reporting deadlines, and others, it's just a final report at the end of the year, but you should really plug it into your calendar so you don't forget about it later. And again, some of what I was saying, it just sort of highlights this. You don't want to underestimate importance of relationships with the person or the organization that gave you a grant. So try to, keep in touch with them. If you have newsletters, annual reports, maybe make sure they're on your mailing list. Use opportunities when you see people in the community to connect with them and, basically build a relationship. Okay. So a new-ish
So
thing.
there is an AI question here that looks like, so let's see.
Oh, good. I'm sorry, I haven't been watching the chat. I've just been sort of carrying on.
Yeah, it's all good. I saw it says, it's from Luke. I'm interested in learning about using AI in proposal development. I found ChatGPT produces the best quality material, while the Norton platform lets you set up documents and info to draw on. Using ethos, pathos, logos is a neat framing.
Cool. Thanks, Luke. Yes. So this is just sort of what I know about the industry so far, which is not a lot. Basically, it's changing and, using that kind of thing. It sounds like you have had some experience with that. I'm not an expert. GrantStation has a lot of good materials, grantstation.com on AI, and people who've tried this out and done things. There's just some things that I would say to be careful of. Right now, I don't use it much. There was one time I was working on an application. My client was in Louisiana, and one of the questions had to do with describing a lot of things about the region's economic development and environmental and thus and such. And I don't live there. So I asked, I used AI to sort of come up with some basic information about that and figure out quickly where to find more information about it instead of trying to slog through and figure it out. It saved me some time. So that was good. Um, I don't use it much though, because my concerns are basically, environmental things like water, electricity costs, impacts on communities that live near AI data centers, and, creative concerns, plagiarism, stuff like that. Um, but on the other hand, it can be a game leveling tool for people who maybe are not really writers or short on time and are in a small organization where you're trying to do a lot of different things at once and you're short on time. So a lot of people have been looking at that and using it because that's sort of the way of it with AI these days. Um, Among funders, sort of the opinions among funders and organizations seem to be almost as varied as the number of funders and organizations that are out there. Some say no to it. Others say that it's fine. Just tell us if you used AI. There was like one or two federal grants that some colleagues of mine ran into that said that. Um, and actually, it's sort of a study that was done last fall. Like the methods that are used to determine if something was written with AI or not online are not really reliable. Like they're not always accurate. Sometimes they'll say things were written with AI when really they weren't, or the other way around. Um, and a lot of funders, this is as of last November, when asked, do you have an AI policy? Do you care if people use AI in their applications? Many just sort of were in kind of wait and see mode. They were kind of waiting to see where the industry was going to go. A lot didn't really have attitudes about it either way. Some did. So it's kind of all over the place. Um, and also a thing to consider is among individual nonprofits, your organization might have or be developing sort of an organizational level AI use policy. And I'm really curious if any of your organizations do have one. Um, None of the people, well, academic institutions that I work with have them, but like sort of small nonprofits so far. And I'm not working with anyone that actually has developed one yet, but they talk about it. So things to do. You want to be careful of hallucinations. Luke, this is probably something you ran into. Hallucinations is when AI lies, like when it basically makes up stuff and you don't know where it came from. I have a colleague who, to demonstrate when she was getting into AI, she just asked ChatGPT to describe her business, and it wrote this really glowing description of her business, and it was pretty good and it was pretty accurate, except it said that her business was in Massachusetts somewhere and she's in Rochester. So you have to be very careful that what you're learning, what it's telling you, is accurate. Don't ever just use AI. Like, a better thing to do is use the links. A lot of times with AI, there'll be links to where it got its data. You can use that to sort of get to a resource that has information you need and then work off of that instead of using the actual thing that the AI produced itself. Um, so different AI providers have ways to keep your information from getting used out in the universe if that's something you're concerned about. You do want to be careful of having some of your work and information shared, especially if you're concerned about privacy or about if there's some kind of trade secret or something you're keeping confidential about a new program you're developing. There is there's on the different platforms, some of them have ways that you can tell them you don't want your information shared with their knowledge base, which means that it won't be shared out into the wider universe. There are some third-party apps. There's a new one called Grantable that I haven't tried yet. That is an AI feature specifically for nonprofits, and it has stronger security controls and policies, I'm told. I haven't tried it myself yet, but that may be something that one of you may have run into already or be interested in looking at. So some best practices include things like I said, don't just use the AI generated content. Make sure you always fact check what AI is telling you. Good way to do that is find the source docs it's talking about and make sure what it's saying really does apply to your situation. And they're not just taking generalizations. So another example of that is somebody had a document written by AI that looked really good, but when they went to one of the source documents, they found out that the data was it was relevant to another state. it wasn't relevant to their specific geographic area, and it got skipped over somehow by the AI, so they had to rethink that part of it. So another way to avoid that, and Luke, I don't know if you've tried this, later it'd be neat to hear, but they another thing you can do is you can upload your source documents and tell it not to share it with the universe. You can use things like you can upload your annual report, your strategic plan, local comprehensive plans. You can upload things and also a copy of the proposal and say like an RFP and say, okay, here's the RFP, here's my organizations, tell me where the fits are and if this is a good match for us and how we would respond to some of these questions. And don't share it with the rest of the universe. And it will base its answer just on the documents that you provide. It's important to be very prescriptive with AI when you're using it, so that way it doesn't try to pull from other places. You can also use that method with your website, but don't tell it to just look at your website to try to pull things. You have to tell it to go to individual pages because AI doesn't know how to scan across a whole website. It needs to have specific links to go to pull data from. And that is all information that I learned by sitting through some GrantStation trainings on AI last fall. So grantstation.com is a good resource, as is about all things grants, the Grant Professionals Association. This is a membership organization nationally that I'm a member of, and they have a lot of resources on their website. The website is there. They have a library, connections to other professionals, a lot of other opinions and ideas from people on ways that they are using AI, if that's interesting to you, or even just other sort of grantsmanship things. And that yellow circled highlight there is their page where you can learn more about best practices. And then another question I get a lot is, where do I find grant funds? How do I do this? Where do I get started? I've done like whole 2-3 hour presentations on just this alone, like showing people where to find things and how to use database searches, things like that. A good place to start for us locally is the Human Service Coalition's fundraising directory, I think it's called. It's on their website at this link. They do a good job of updating it every year, every couple of years. The last update was, I think, fall of 2025 or 2025 at any rate. So definitely check that out for local and regional relevant examples that might apply to what you're doing. If you want to look for federal funds, grants.gov is their main database. That's been going through a lot of changes and upheaval over the last year and a half, but it is there and it's a searchable database. And in addition to grants.gov, if you know that what you fund relates to a specific department, maybe, the Department of Education or Health and Human Services, or, department that, and the environment, things like that, you can look at those. Also, get back to our page. Okay. New York State funds, Grants Gateway is not as around or as searchable as it used to be. Specific agencies will have grant offerings on their websites. They'll very often have a page where they list their solicitations. You can get on a thing called the New York State Contract Reporter, which will send out a list of bids every day. I do it because I write to such a wide variety of things. A lot of the things that come out are not grants at all. There are people that, bids to clear stands of trees in certain patches of forests and redo sidewalks in, different cities and things like that. But they also, a lot of grant organizations will use grants, the New York State Contract Reporter, to announce when they have things coming out. So it's something else to think about. And the federal agencies actually will do that too. You can get on their lists, like DOJ is one that does that. You can get on a list and they will just send you updates of when their new things are coming out. GuideStar is a free of charge site that gives current information on specific funders' recent giving practices. or you can research their 990 forms there to try to figure out how much money a certain funder gives out in a year. These resources are all free and don't cost anything. There are other ones that you can get subscriptions to, like grantstation.com, or Candid has an online foundation directory. There's another online search organization called Instrumental that you can get a subscription to, and it will do searches and tell you if they find fits that organizations that might fit with what you're doing and what your needs are. Excuse me. So that was super, super fast, but those are some things. Or some ways to try to locate and find grant funds. And I can answer questions about that or anything. And I just want to say thank you for attending. My email is here. You can also call me if you have questions following this. Certainly reaching out by email I will answer your question anytime. But what questions do you have now?
So there are a couple questions in the chat that I can read. Let's see. There was an AI one. There's a question from Beth. I also do contract grant writing, and I found more so than not that organizations that want to hire a grant writer are themselves not grant ready as an organization. Is there a resource you can recommend that helps organizations review their organization health to become grant ready?
I think I've seen those at GPA. If you're a member of the Grant Professionals Association, I know that there's a lot of colleagues there that have that. A lot of places use checklists like the one I shared and just say, okay, do you have these things? How ready are you? And just I'm sure you probably had conversations with folks about readiness. A lot of newer organizations may have a hard time competing for grants at certain levels because they don't have as long of a track record to demonstrate. Maybe they haven't been in existence very long, haven't filed financial reports that show that they're financially solvent from year to year. Typically, the longer an organization is around and has those documents, the more they're going to be able to show that that ethos piece, right? That sort of credibility piece. But newer organizations trying to do that, sometimes it takes time to develop those, but it's always good to get started on that. Yeah, as far as like sort of I guess a barometer to use, I'd check the Grant Professionals Association and see if there's any templates or anything there. I mean, like I said, I just sort of talk them through. This is what you have. These are what some of your chances are. A lot of times with newer organizations like that, I'll direct them to start with local resources because those tend to be easiest to start. And then once you get your feet under you and have started, you'll be able to then be more competitive for the sort of bigger things later on.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth.
Question from Billy. Is there a good directory of local statewide grant opportunities that is sortable by criteria or topics?
And I think you shared those websites, so that's
okay.
helpful. So thank you.
Yeah. For local, I definitely would start with the HSC one. And so if you're looking at federal ones, I know grants.gov is searchable by keyword. The state one, like Grants Gateway, is not super viable. I'm sorry, that slide was not updated since the last time I did this, and they've switched over to SFS. And that system, if you any of you use SFS, it's a little hard to use, and not super searchable. If you wanted to try, things like Instrumental, I'll put it in the chat. I would definitely check that out. I think they have like a free trial period, but that is one, like, so those kinds of search things that you pay for, they will do searches by topic area or geographic area or just a few keywords here and there. Yeah, so I just put it in the chat, instrumental.com. They're a pretty user-friendly one to try.
All right. Are there any other questions? I see some thank yous. Thank you. No, thank you all for coming into this conversation. Are there any other questions we can answer? Or anyone just want to come off of mute?
Gloria, I just had a quick question for the spring grant cycle
Uh-huh.
for the Community Foundation. I was
Yes.
trying to find the deadlines for that. But I didn't have a lot of luck.
So let me, let's see, post this link for our info session. So our info session is next week, Wednesday at noon. The application will open up on March 30th, so next week. And then it is going to close. You know, I should have this information in the back of my brain because I've been looking at it for so long. It closes May. Let me see. I'm gonna get this wrong. I know I'm gonna get this wrong. Wait. Stay with me. I'm gonna get you the right answer. I don't want to give you the wrong information. All right. Cycles. It's on this website. All right. So it opens. May 4th. Okay, so opens up next week, March 30th. Oh, one place it says the 30th, one place it says the 31st, but it's the 30th. And then it's due on May 4th.
Thank you.
Yes. Perfect. Okay, well, if there is nothing else, no other urgent questions, or nobody wants to come up and say hello to me or say hi to Stacey. We want to thank you all again for joining us. Thank you for for watching the video. We want to thank Stacey for being here, for spending some time with us, and again creating this this co-learning, co-discovery space. Thank you so much for being here. We again want to remind you about next week, our information session for the Community Foundation's grant cycle is next week at noon. I put the link in the chat, or you can find it on our website at cftompkins.org. Again, thank you all so much for being here and for joining us. And I want to say have a great afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.